Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the upcoming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming Shayla Lawson and Emma DeBerry, Paul Tremblay, and Megan Margulies. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you haven't already done so, you can sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Adrian Tomine and Randall Park. Adrian Tomine self-published his comic book series Optic Nerve when he was 16, and in 1994, he received an offer to publish from Drawn and Quarterly. His comics have been anthologized in McSweeney's, Best American Comics, and Best American Non-Required Reading, and his graphic novel Shortcomings was the New York Times Notable Book of the Year. 2015's Killing and Dying appeared on numerous best of lists and was a New York Times bestseller as well. In his latest, The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist, Tomine illustrates the amusing absurdities of how we spend our time, all while minding his conflicted relationship with comics and comics culture. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and daughters. Adrian Tomine is joined in conversation by Randall Park, who is a fixture in the comedy world of TV and film. He is the beloved star of ABC's Fresh Off the Boat. He also co-wrote, produced, and starred in the critically acclaimed hit Netflix romantic comedy Always Be My Maybe with his friend Ali Wong. He currently lives in Los Angeles with his wife Jae Soo Park and their daughter Ruby. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. And most importantly, please consider supporting Adrian Tomine and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his book. A link to buy The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist was included in your registration email and will also be shared in the chat a few times this evening. And without any further ado, please welcome Adrian and Randall.
All right.
Thank you.
Here we go. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
How you doing, Adrian?
I'm good. I'm glad to see you. I wish we were doing this in person, and I'm sorry I'm not there in Portland, but I'm thankful for everyone for showing up, and I'm thankful to you, Randall, for doing this. It's a real honor.
Of course, this is an honor for me. I got to tell you. I mean, I've told you this in before, but I am just such a huge fan of your work, and I've been a fan for a very long time, and the fact that that I've even met you, let alone gotten to know you a little bit, has been just such a thrill for me. And I got to tell you, before we ever met, when I knew that I was gonna meet you, I was very nervous. I was very nervous. I didn't know if I wanted to meet you, because
a lot of people say that.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, I thought you'd be a lot meaner, or at least a lot darker.
Yeah,
a person. And I'm wondering, do you get that a lot? Like, do fans have a preconceived notion of how you might be in real life based on your work?
It could be. I feel like a lot of times at signings in bookstores, there is sort of an awkwardness that's in the air, and maybe you're implying that I'm responsible for that. I bring. It could very well be true.
Well, I mean, I got to say, I'm glad that I mustered up the courage to meet you, because you turned out to be a lovely person. But like in reading this book, there's a lot of there's numerous Q&As, public Q&As, where you're met with kind of hostile fans of your work or people in the Q&A, and part of me wonders, like, oh gosh, I wonder if these people had a preconceived notion of maybe you might be more combative and almost like embracing kind of an argument.
Maybe. I think, throughout my career, and I depict different points in the book. I think there was sort of different baggage that I brought to these events. I think early on, I was really overhyped and over publicized, and I think there was sort of sort of a emperor's new clothes kind of attitude that came. Like I showed the guy in New York who kind of tore me apart at the end of my at one of my book events with sort of like,
was this the really handsome guy?
Yeah, the really, you had to remind me, Randall.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. It's
right.
such a hilarious part in the book where your friends afterwards, they just can't get over how handsome this guy is.
Yeah,
including into you,
including my future wife. Yeah,
that's right.
She was part of that group too. Who just, he was kind of annoying, but man, he was good looking.
So with everything that's happening now, and the fact that you're not doing these book tours in person for this particular book, is that are you happy about that, or is there a part of you that has kind of grown to love the in-person book tour?
There is, and more so than ever because of the last 4 or 5 months of just being home all the time. I think it, I think, when we were setting up the tour earlier in the year, and it was looking like it was going to be this extensive thing, and we were making arrangements to send our kid to sleepaway camp and all this stuff. Yeah. It was starting to seem a little daunting to me. It also involved Comic-Con, which would have been happening this weekend.
Oh, right.
Always takes a little bit of energy.
As there's a couple of Comic-Cons in the book, correct?
Yes. I've got a history with it, for sure. I was wondering if this would be another crying at Comic-Con incident for me. But and then when it all, everything kind of happened slowly in increments. First, it was like, let's postpone it a little bit. Let's alter the tour a little bit. And then finally it was canceled. And I think I had, a day of adjusting to that. And then I was kind of excited about not having to travel too much this summer. Yeah. And then now, 5 months later, I'm thinking, I'd give anything to be at that hotel next door to Comic-Con, just like eating room service and like being alone for a few minutes.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, there is, it's called The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist, and they're just in these book tours, there's just so much solitude and loneliness, and
I know, and now I'm craving it. It's it's like I realized how spoiled I was that there was a time when I would gripe about having to fly to some city and stay in a hotel, and for me it was sort of like this up and down of like, for 1 hour you're like the most important guy in the room or something like that, and then for 23 hours you feel completely lonely and like you wish you were just home, and you wish you had someone you could give a call to. Right.
In the book there's a 2 panels where one, it's like you're at the event and you're just wishing you could be alone. Yeah. And then in the very next panel you're sitting alone in your hotel room and you're just wishing you could be around somebody.
That's like book tours boiled down to 2 panels for me. I mean, I imagine it's similar in acting, right? You have moments of like extreme pressure and eyes are upon you, and then suddenly you're just completely just killing time, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is the Sbarro incident in your book where you're sitting in a Sbarro's alone at the window. Yeah. And it's right next to where your book event was, and all these fans walk by.
Stupidest move of my life.
Fans walk by and they're looking at you and they're like, he's sitting alone. That's so sad.
Yeah, slurping spaghetti. Yeah.
That's happened to me many times.
Oh, really? Is that right?
I mean, I actually enjoy going to a restaurant and eating alone.
So do I.
Yeah. But when I feel like someone is looking at me doing it, especially someone who may know who I am or be familiar with, I don't know what about that just makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah. So in that story in the book, I didn't want it to make it seem like it was sad that I was going to eat dinner by myself. Like that was, that's fun, So, and sometimes, especially after doing an event you know, like this, we'll talk for an hour or something like that, but then usually that's followed by a long session of signing books and chatting with people. And then, then maybe there's some people hanging around afterwards and that you talk to. And then, so sometimes it's kind of a relief to sit and eat a plate of crappy food by yourself or something.
Right.
But what was the point of it was just that I chose one that was like right in the path of where the event was.
Right.
People walk by and they looked at me with pity. That's what made me feel embarrassed. If they'd been like, hey, enjoy your spaghetti, I would have felt fine. But they just looked at me like it was like the saddest. Like I envisioned them turning the corner and just throwing my books into the garbage can.
Because they saw you eating a limp slice of pizza.
Yeah. Like I don't want this guy's books anymore.
Now in the book there are like numerous sections where you get a chance to meet your colleagues and some of them your heroes and people who are celebrated and known. There's a one story where you're at an award show and you're one of the nominees and Frank Miller is announcing the nominees and he doesn't even bother to pronounce your name to even say your name. And then there's another one where you recognize a legend who I guess he's nameless in the book, but and you know you muster up the courage to meet him, and he finds out you're Japanese American, and the first thing he says is, "I love jujitsu."
Yeah, it's burned into my memory. That line is completely burned into my memory.
I laughed so hard at that, but I also felt so bad for you. I mean, the whole book, I feel so bad for you.
But I sort of, I'm in a position of power making this book in a way.
Yes,
like that guy isn't on. He's not going to pop up in a window now to defend himself or something. I don't think.
Right. He might.
So, to me, we'll watch the chat down below.
Yeah.
But I sort of now feel like I want to put that a little bit in context and just say that person was extremely old. Like it doesn't, it's not revealed he's kind of shown off screen and it's not gone into great detail, but he's very, very old from maybe 2 generations prior to me.
Sure.
And I believe in my heart that he was trying to
make a connection.
To make a connection, yeah.
I
I don't think he knew that it was going to make me feel awkward or that it would end up in a book later.
But have those types of experiences in a way have they like jaded you, or like are you like when you see somebody on the street that you recognize and you admire, like do you generally go up to them
No.
or do you stay away?
Well, yeah, in New York and obviously in LA, it's fairly common, like in Berkeley, when I had lived there and had spent most of my life living in Sacramento and in Oregon and everything, I might have been more apt to approach a celebrity because it's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And in New York, it's pretty common, and there's sort of a unwritten, unspoken rule that if you're a real New Yorker, you don't give a shit. Yeah, you're not gonna like even turn your head. You're not gonna try and sneak a photo on your camera. You just whatever. There's
Right.
Yeah.
But with that said, are there any people that come to mind that you'd really like to meet if you saw them? You'd feel compelled to meet, maybe heroes or people just that you admire.
Sure, or just even, I mean, I'm just, I will admit that there's a part of me that just is fascinated by, showbiz and all that.
Yeah.
And so even if it was some like character actor who I recognized that, if we had a friend in common who could introduce us, I'd love to pick his brain and chat with him about his work and everything like that.
See, that's the difference between you and me. I will avoid it at all costs. Like
you have no interest, right?
No, it's not that I don't have interest. It's that I'm deathly afraid that they'll be mean for some reason.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where that comes from. I just, and I felt the same way with you. I was afraid that you'd be mean, and I respect you so much, and I respect these people, and I'm a fan, and I guess I just don't want to ruin it.
Yeah. Well, as depicted in the book, that has happened to me occasionally. and in things that aren't in the book. Yeah, I mean, especially more related to you know, Hollywood kind of stuff, when someone has reached out to me about working together or something like that, or if I've met someone or something like that. It is terrible when someone that you're a fan of kind of disappoints you to a degree that you can't enjoy their work as much anymore.
Yeah, yeah, and it may not even be a commentary on them. It may just be they might have had a bad day, or you know, but you catch them at the wrong time, and your vision of them is just forever changed.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
did you have one experience like that sort of set you on this path? You don't have to name names, but I'm just wondering if like you got into the business and then suddenly you were.
You know, surprisingly, no, not really. I've been lucky enough to meet and work with legendary people, you know, and sometimes I'm essentially just in the background for some of these jobs, and but most of them, if not all of them, have turned out to be pretty nice people, and that, you know, usually it's the ones who are not at that status. Who when I do meet people who aren't so nice, they're usually like not there yet, you know.
Yeah.
And maybe they feel insecure about it, so they have to act a certain way.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But you were able to meet, and not only meet, but become friends with some personal heroes of yours.
Sure.
And they're depicted in the book, Dan Close.
Yeah.
And the late Richard Sala.
Yeah.
And it's just such a cool section of the book where you've kind of worked so hard, and so you were so singularly focused, and all of a sudden you're hanging out with these heroes.
Yeah, I mean,
how did that happen?
It's the luckiest coincidence of my life, I think, that there were these two cartoonists who I was a fan of as a kid. I knew their work thoroughly starting from the time I was probably about 12. I kind of started getting into their work. Richard Sala, who he had animation on MTV on that Liquid Television, and was in Raw, like one of the most groundbreaking anthologies. And Dan Clowes, who I was such a fan of that I'd actually sent fan mail to, and had sent early, mini comics of mine to him in the mail when he was living in Chicago and I was living in Sacramento. And then when I left Sacramento to go to college, I went to Berkeley, and I spent 1 year living in the dorms. And then in my sophomore year, I just moved into a random apartment with some friends that I knew from the dorms. And we just found a place on, I can say it since none of us live there anymore, on College Avenue in Berkeley. And it turned out that I was living kind of equidistant by a couple blocks in either direction from both Dan Clowes and Richard Sala, who just happened to live on College Avenue on either side of the apartment where I was living.
Just out of sheer coincidence.
Coincidence, yeah. They had already figured that out and had become friends because they were neighbors. And then, Dan's wife, Erica, a great friend of mine, was a classmate of mine at Berkeley, and she went out of her way to come up and introduce herself to me and said, maybe you want to meet up with Dan for coffee sometime. And
that's I mean, that must have been like, did that, at the time when that happened, did that make you feel like this must be fate, this this direction that I've chosen to take my life into, it must be like kind of predestined?
Yeah, I mean, that I had a lot of lucky breaks and a lot of amazing coincidences, but I would say that was the one that seemed the most almost kind of mystical or something, where I felt like, I was I think 18 or 19 at the time, and it was the second year that I had lived away from home in my whole life.
Oh wow.
And so it was just sort of this it felt like some sort of fulfillment of the promise that I had a horrible time in high school, and I
Right.
disliked it so much. And I remember older people, like my brother would often tell me like, okay, I know it's not great now, but when you get to college, you're going to meet new people and it's going to be a great time for you. And I just I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't accept it. And then when that happened, I sort of had this feeling of like, oh, you know, it really did pay off to move away and take this adventure and go to this school and
right.
open myself up a little bit more to the world.
Now, during that time in high school, or all those years, the years that aren't covered in the book, between 1982 and once you've kind of made it as a successful, you know, all those years in between, what was there anything that was like pivotal in your development during that time, that any sort of moments that looking back that you found to be really valuable despite being very difficult for you?
Yeah, I mean, as much as I talk negatively about my high school experience, I'm absolutely certain that that time and the solitude that it gave me was crucial to this career path that I've been on ever since then. Because you know, I think the book gives sort of the wrong impression that I was just this dedicated artist from childhood and I only cared about making comics and my life played out exactly the way I wanted. But I know for a fact that if in high school I was kind of given two equally plausible paths, and like you could come to this party and hang out with all of us, or you could stay home and draw comics, I definitely would have picked the social part, you know,
right,
to enjoy life at that time. And so to not have that option, I think really was a blessing in disguise in some ways.
Right. Was there ever during, I guess, almost your entire life, a time where you entertained the thought of doing something else, maybe even another art form, or I mean, did your parents prefer you to do anything, or was there any kind of inclination towards any direction, or was it always very clear to you?
Well, you know, contrary to how I portrayed in the book, I wasn't always so sure that I would make comics as a career. I knew it was something that I would always do, but I was definitely open to the possibility that it would continue being a hobby the way it was throughout my childhood. Right. And the way it was when I started college too, which is like I'd go to class all day and then I'd come home and then I was free to work on comics.
But there was never a time when you wanted to be like a dancer or surprise us here, Adrian.
You know, I really had a vision of kind of having these boring, but to me, appealing jobs that would also give me the time to do comics. So
right.
For a long time, I wanted to be the guy who sits in a newsstand kiosk.
Oh, wow.
Who just sits there and like occasionally sells some gum to someone or something like that.
Right. This was like a fantasy. This was a fantasy of yours.
Wow. That seemed like an ideal job to me. Aside from being a professional cartoonist, I didn't have like big dreams. There was never like an astronaut possibility or something like that. It was now that I think about it, it was always something where I'd be sitting alone in a room.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, either drawing or selling magazines to people or something like that.
Yeah, so this was meant to be.
I think so. I think so.
In the book, you have a terrific shit story. And I always love a good shit story because to me it's that, come on, we all can relate. It's so human, and your story is so sad and so hilarious. Basically, you're with the journalist who's interviewing you while you're having lunch, and you load up on the dairy. And
cheese grits and a latte,
right. and extra hollandaise.
Oh yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah.
And you and out of sheer loneliness and desperation, you want to hang out with this person afterwards.
Oh yeah.
which I totally understand. And she seems lovely, and you end up taking a walk, and the scene essentially ends in your apartment with you on the toilet and her separated by a wall, like a couple feet away.
A paper thin door. I mean, it was like the cheapest college apartment.
It's basically beads, like the hanging beads.
Yeah.
Separating the two.
I mean, in my memory, it's probably not true, but in my memory, I could hear her turning the pages of her magazine.
Oh my gosh. But the question that immediately sprang to mind after reading that was, has this person reached out to you?
No.
Or has anybody that have been depicted in this book, or really any of your work, maybe loosely depicted?
Yes, I have already heard from a number of people who are depicted in this book. Some of them are just friends, and so I knew that I'd be hearing from them. I have received 2 apologies. One,
oh God.
one which was, correctly connected to what's depicted in the book.
Okay.
One was from someone who I hadn't thought of in a long time, and definitely was not holding a grudge against, and definitely did not depict in the book in any way. So I didn't know exactly what they were talking about.
Oh, wow.
And I was just talking to someone today. I was doing another interview, and this person told me that they had personally informed Neil Gaiman of his.
Oh, that's right. I mean, he's
recurring,
an incident.
Recurring.
Yeah,
they told him about the Gaiman incident.
Yeah.
So word is getting out slowly.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, this book is about memories. Mm-hmm. and the ways in which, I guess, we remember our lives, and for you, so much of your memories are this series of indignities and embarrassments, and
right.
You have I'm going to read a quote here from your book. At the end, you talk about you say, "My clearest memories related to comics about being a cartoonist are the embarrassing gaffes, the small humiliations, the perceived insults. Almost everything else is either hazy or forgotten. It's weird." And this really spoke to me, because I'm the same way. It's hard for me to remember the good things, but I almost romanticize the bad things.
Yeah.
Like I covet them, and but it's also kind of a sad way to remember your life, but I wonder, are there any experiences or accolades in your life that stand out for you as actually like a source of pride or
sure.
happiness, and what are some of those?
Sure. I mean, that's the sort of an incomplete portrait that I paint in this book, because no one would want to read a book where I just list all the great accomplishments that I'm so proud of, and the nice things that have happened to me.
I mean, I mean, I'm interested in
well, yeah, and it's been the career has been full of things like that,
right.
And some more kind of under the radar than you might expect. Like
those are the best things usually.
Right. So like, to me, like some of like the most vivid memories I have from the early years was when I would get a piece of mail back from a cartoonist who was a hero of mine.
Right.
Like I would send them some copies of my work, and then they would write back to me, and even just like the hint of encouragement that I would sort of kind of read between the lines and say, like, I think that means they liked it, or something like that.
Yeah.
It really stuck with me. And, there are even artists who, whatever, 20 years later, maybe I haven't followed their career. I'm not as much of a fan as I was when I was a teenager, but I will always love those artists for having written back to me and for having encouraged me. Those kinds of things mean a lot to me.
just
the other,
just the effort to show an appreciation and an acknowledgement that they're watching you and they're appreciating your work.
yeah, it was unbelievable. Especially, I mean, it might not have had quite the same impact if I was growing up in New York and, you know, everybody's dad was a famous something or other and their moms were famous for this and that, you know, all these kind of closer connections to the world of public, you know, publication and being public figures. In my childhood, it just felt like that whole world was like on some other side of a barrier that I couldn't cross. So like people who work published, you know, it was like kind of magical to me that a human made this thing that I would go to a store and purchase, you know. To have that curtain kind of swept aside and you know, see, oh, I guess this guy just wrote this on a postcard and put it in a mailbox. It was really life-changing for me, I think, and that really was what you know, pushed me towards trying to make it a career.
Yeah, I mean, and what a great example of how to live life in success, to you know, to let other people know who are starting out that you're on the right path. One of my prized possessions is a hand-typed single-page letter that I got in the mail one day from Tom Hanks.
Oh, really?
Of all people.
Really?
Yeah, and it kind of came out of nowhere. And he, you know, I was on Veep at the time, and he was a huge fan of Veep, and we had worked together years ago, just in one scene on a movie, and I thought he had forgotten. I didn't think he even remembered who it was, and this letter came out of nowhere, and he remembered our scene together, and I thought, wow, you know, it says a lot more about Tom Hanks than it does about me.
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, that's I mean, great performance, Danny Chung, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I loved it.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, but yeah, no, I think it's good to remember that you know, something like that really, it seems like what a huge gesture and everything, but it really doesn't take that much effort to write a note or something like that, but the impact can be,
the impact is huge.
Be profound.
There's a really great I mean, the whole book is so great, and you folks who haven't gotten the book, you got to get the book. It's fantastic, and there's this great piece in it where you have an interview with the legendary Terry Gross of Fresh Air, and during the interview, you in the middle of the interview, this almost ghost-like apparition version of yourself kind of floats out of you and torments you throughout the whole interview, and there's such a strange thing that happens where he points out the window and you're looking through the window and there is a clear view of a dentist office where a guy is having a procedure done and blood just shoots out of his face during the interview. I think it might be the only instance of color.
It is. Yeah, we had to pay a lot for that little gag.
But it's jarring because of that. But you came out of the interview, you know, cursing yourself, and gosh, that was a nightmare. And it just out of curiosity, I looked up the interview online.
I know. I did this to myself because it's a little bit of the Streisand effect, you know, where you draw attention to something that you probably just should have.
But it's a great interview, and well, I'm like, you know, gosh, there must be there's, and I understand it, how you can get in your head about things, but I'm like, there's got to be some sort of disconnect here.
No.
I thought the interview was great.
No, the disconnect is that Fresh Air has incredible editors, and they were very kind how they chopped up my.
I would have had no idea.
Yeah, they did a great job. Yeah. And they must have been like surgeons, and they're like, let's try these words together and
cut out all the crying.
Yeah, and I'm not I'm absolutely certain that there were long chunks of conversation, horrible conversation on my part, that did not end up in the final thing. So
Right.
I know they took pity on me and just chopped it. And I'm sure there was like 30 minutes of just snippets of me going and like,
well, no one would ever know listening to, but I guess they have an idea now from reading your book. But
yeah.
but that was in 2008.
Mhm.
Would you say that apparition still haunts you to this day?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there was a time when I had the idea to have that be a device that runs through the whole book,
Right.
of having that kind of ghost version of me following around, whispering negative thoughts into
Right.
my ear. I didn't do it mainly because I wanted to make the book more varied and a little more realistic, but also because of a great cartoonist named Chester Brown has a similar device in one of his autobiographical books, where there's sort of like an angel version of him, or a devil or something like that kind of
Yes.
floats around and whispers thoughts in his ear. And I thought it was too close to that. But it's a great, credit to Chester for doing that, because I think that was a great depiction of something that I feel all the time. Right now, I feel.
Really? Do you
Sure.
feel like? Do you feel like, though, that as you've gotten older and with your family and which is such a big part of the book, that
Yeah.
if not, since you haven't exorcised this demon from your life, but do you feel like you have more control over it at this point?
Yeah, I think in a way, it's been so helpful to become a parent, because it's like I don't have the time or the space in my mind to obsess over that kind of stuff anymore,
Right.
or not as much. There's a lot more room for those kinds of ghosts to float around when you're like a single guy in your 20s living in a crappy apartment in Berkeley.
Right.
And now it's just, my life feels so full and busy and focused
Right.
on other people most of the time, that I think that's been really helpful to not give so much attention to that.
Right. Speaking of those other people, your immediate family plays such a central role in this book. What was the process like to write about your family while living under the same roof with that family?
Well, unlike a lot of cartoonists, I don't have a studio that I go to. I don't like leave the house and go work anywhere. I don't even have a separate room to work in. I have a desk that's in the corner of our bedroom. So there's really no privacy. I mean, it's just whatever I'm working on is sort of on display to my family.
Yeah.
So when I was working on this book, I definitely noticed an uptick in the interest from my family members as I started approaching the point of in the chronology where they would show up as characters.
Right.
And then suddenly they were coming over to my desk and looking to see how my work was. So
Right.
Interested to see how my work was going all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And it was it's always useful. I actually really find that my wife and my older daughter are really great editors in a lot of ways, because
Right.
My wife is very she actually worked as an editor in publishing before we got married.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So she's got a real talent for that, and she can be honest with me. She can be critical. She can give me praise that really means a lot to me. Sometimes that, either positive or negative, it's coming from other people. It doesn't penetrate my brain as much, but from my wife, it really means a lot.
Yeah.
And my older daughter is just a great natural audience, because if I'm working on a cover for the New Yorker or something, and she comes in, and sometimes just the simplest question she asks can just like change my whole perception of what I'm doing, because it's like, oh, okay, something was unclear to her.
Yeah.
And this should be visually, it's not like a complicated story. It's like a visual,
Right.
just an image. And so if she doesn't understand what that thing is that I drew, then that probably means I didn't draw it well enough.
Right. Right. Yeah, in a lot of ways, this book is a literal love letter to your family and to those daughters.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful how you bring that, tie that into the end there. And in this letter, you say, I'm going to read this from the book, to your daughters. You taught me a lot about being less selfish and more open-hearted and just trying to be a decent person in the world. You forced me to do things I didn't think I was capable of. You did it over and over every day, and it saved me from a very different life.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think your life would be like now if you didn't have Sarah and the kids?
Yeah, I think it would be very similar to the life that I had before I met them. I think I would still be in Berkeley, and I think I would still be living in my little apartment by myself. Yeah. And I think that possibly I'd be a more prolific artist. There's a chance that I would have produced more at this point. But I would be, very despondent, especially after all these years.
Right.
Yeah, I really, there's no way to really know. There's no
yes, of course,
parallel, vision into this alternate universe. But I do feel like that getting married and having kids was a really positive influence on my work. I think that kind of just and in perfect serendipity too. Like I think I was approaching this point in my life where I almost felt this obligation to keep doing the similar kind of work that I had started out and gotten some recognition for, which was sort of like these sad, lonely hipster kind of stories set in California. And I was just completely burnt out on it. I didn't feel any connection to that kind of work anymore personally, because I wasn't that person, and I hadn't been for a long time. I wasn't going to clubs and going out drinking and trying to meet people or anything like that. But I felt trapped. I was like, well, what else do I do? I don't know what else to write about. I don't have any experience. I've lived my whole life at a desk.
Right.
And then getting married and having kids, it just opened up, so many new parts of my brain.
It just made you a more complete kind of person, right?
Yeah, and for selfish reasons, it was suddenly like, oh, look at all this material that I can start mining. It really saved me. It really saved me in a lot of ways.
Let's dive into some of the questions here.
Oh yeah,
our friends on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one from Matthew Manos. Writing about your own life takes courage. There's certainly moments we would never think to share with the public, but might ultimately best capture the story of our life. How do you choose what you reveal and what to keep personal?
Well, it's a tough question, and I think this was an unusual book for me in that I felt like I had way more material than I could fit into the book, and I was actually editing myself quite a bit. And usually it's the opposite. I'm trying to pad out the books to make them look thicker than they really are, or something like that. But I hate to give anyone. I don't think there's any strict advice about it. For me, it was a very intuitive process. The writing process of the book began with me deciding that this might not actually be my next book. That I didn't pitch it to my publisher. I didn't take an advance right at the beginning. I didn't let any of the pages leave my desk, so no one had seen any of it. And I think I worked for at least till I was halfway through the book before I even let my publisher know about it. And that gave me this really great safety net of maybe this isn't really the next book, and if it starts to be horrible or if it goes in a bad direction, I can just file it away and no one will know, and I'll start something else.
Now, at that point, did you know how you were going to end the book, or were you?
I did. I by that point I had it all figured out. I mean, it started out with just the idea of being those anecdotes at the beginning, but then the incident that I depict at the end happen, and that sort of shaped the whole book for me.
Right.
Which was a great relief to my wife. Speaking of having in-house editors,
Right.
I remember at one point, Sarah would come into the room and look at what I was doing, and she would be kind of laughing or, saying, "Oh, I remember when you told me about that." And then eventually it kind of started trailing off, and her reaction started to get more and more muted. And I come in and just look at it, and then I said, "What, is it terrible?" And she said, "Well, I know you said that this was going to be like a 200-page book. Is it just going to be 200 pages of this over and over again?" Right. And I said, "Oh, okay, just wait, suspend judgment, because it is going to evolve." And that's why I didn't want my publisher to see the pages too early,
right,
because I thought that would be the same reaction. And so I thought either the beginning or the end on their own are incomplete.
Right. The ending is so satisfying and just so beautiful, and it ties everything up so well. And I can't wait for everyone to read it who hasn't read it yet. This next question from Chris Kim. Hi folks, Adrian. I was just filing some of the original comic art I've collected over the years, including a few of yours. Do you own any original comic art? And if so, do any of the pieces have any special significance to you?
Oh, what a great question. Yes, I don't have any of my artwork up on the walls in our house, but I have artwork from other cartoonists, and most of whom are friends of mine. And they all hold a special significance because they were all gifts or trades. And especially when I was a young artist and I felt like I'd somehow snuck into this club of my heroes and they were somehow letting me hang out with them. It was just one of those kind of heart-stopping moments when someone like Chris Ware would say, "I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you ever would be interested in doing a trade, I would be open to that."
Wow.
Yeah, and then I'm like, oh my God. And so there's some things like that, and I have vivid memories of doing those trades. I might as well be specific. I've got a giant spread from Dan Clowes's graphic novel, David Boring. It's like the title spread, and it's this huge piece of art that's hanging over our living room couch, and that was a wedding gift. And
oh wow, that's so cool,
so meaningful to me. And Seth, Dan Clowes, I've got two pieces from Julie Doucet that hang right in our main room in our apartment that I just never get tired of looking at. Jaime Hernandez, who was one of the biggest influences on my life. I have just a classic page of his, and I was so amazed to get a page from this era of his work that completely formed me as an artist. So it's sort of like seeing, the actual inspiration, the artifact of that hanging on my wall every day.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Lice Brasileiro, sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. How different is it to depict your life in your comics and to create fictional characters? Do you think you've mastered one better than the other?
Another good question. It's, I think, more natural for me to express myself through fictional stories and characters. I think I worked really hard at developing that process. And with my previous book, Killing and Dying, I hate to say it, but it took me about 7 years to complete. And the whole time I was thinking about, okay, what's the next story going to be? I got to finish this one. And so I was always kind of writing a short story in my mind, and they were all sort of in that same tonal range. And that ended up being, I ended up feeling like, especially with that book, that I thought, like, this is the best way to express myself. These are more autobiographical than if I had drawn myself as the main character, because I felt a little protected by the veil of fiction. And then when that book was done and I turned it in, I couldn't turn off that part of my brain. I kept thinking of like, oh, now here's another story. And then I realized I didn't want to do another book just like that,
Right.
in succession. So I had to make a conscious effort to do this more explicitly autobiographical book. And then, eventually it took some adjustment, but then once I clicked over into that mode, and especially because I set up, like I talked about, that sort of illusion that maybe I wasn't serious about it, that maybe it wasn't for publication, that helped me get into that mindset. And so now I'm there. If I want to start working in a fictional mode again, I have to sort of make that adjustment again, because right now I feel like, no, I should just, why make up stories when my real life is so unbelievable in some ways, or so funny in some ways.
Right. I feel like it's reflected in the literal physical production of the books. I like this book it's like a moleskin kind of a sketchbook, and the actual art is done on these graph sheets. It's almost as if it's like your personal sketchbook, and whereas in Killing and Dying, it's almost like it's in a glass case kind of.
I know. I think that's a good way to describe it. And I think part of the idea for the book design on the new one was that I knew I was going to be drawing it in that more loose, pared down drawing style. I was trying to find a way of drawing that to me was the equivalent of handwriting, where you don't think about every little thing. It just sort of comes out naturally. And I knew that it wouldn't look as slick or as professional. And I think it ties into the whole story in a way, but the format was also my way of signaling right away to readers, like, I'm not in decline. Like I didn't lose my drawing ability in my old age or something like that. It's all a concept of sorts.
Yeah.
I saw that someone down there put a chat saying that they had a question in the Q&A section, which maybe is a separate.
I've been reading from the Q&A section.
Okay.
I haven't actually been reading from the chat section.
Oh, okay. I don't.
But here is another question from the Q&A.
Okay.
From an anonymous attendee. Have you ever considered teaching comics at the university level, like Linda Berry?
It's been brought up to me. I don't know if I'm a very good teacher. We should ask my kids after 4 months of homeschooling if they think that's a good idea or not. I've done short-term things. Like I've gone and given talks, or I've gone for a day to a class or something like that. But I have to say it's hard for me. Maybe it's something that I can work on and figure out how to do correctly. But a lot of the things that I've figured out how to do as a cartoonist, I can't even remember how I got to this point. Like I don't know how I figured out how to do these things. So it makes it hard to teach, I think. And I think it's also hard for me to figure out a way to replicate the process of just bashing away at something for your entire life. If you meet someone and they're 25 and they say, how do you start becoming a cartoonist? It's hard for me to compress, the previous 23 years or whatever,
Right.
Oh, look, we're getting a message from Powell here.
Looks like we have time for one more. Okay. Okay. This is a good one. Rama Hughes, Randall and Adrian, what made you laugh the hardest in your life?
Oh God. You go first, Randall.
Gosh, the hardest in my life. That is a good question. I don't know, but definitely what stands out is probably something my wife said. I mean, my wife is the funniest person I know, and she's a total ham. And And she's on currently. You might have seen her on the show Never Have I Ever, and which is a great show. And she plays one of the characters' moms on the show, and she's insane and hilarious. And so I definitely think I don't know about the hardest in my life. I don't remember, but definitely the hardest of recent has been from something crazy that she said.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'd agree that, and it's probably pointless to even try and quote it, because things that my kids say or my wife say on a daily basis are hilarious to me, but it requires such a backstory and such an intimacy that it wouldn't translate well. But yeah.
But I will say, what's up there for sure is this right here. This virtual background is not doing it justice. But Adrian's book is definitely one of the funniest things I've read in a very long time, and also very just smart and sad and beautiful. And I really recommend everybody to get the book. And with that, are there any kind of parting words that you have for
I just want to say thanks and tell you that means a lot to me, because I've known of you, I've seen you for so long now. I don't want to make you feel old. People always say that to me, like I've been reading your work since I was a teenager or something, and I suddenly feel old. But I do feel like you've been this presence through the TV screen in my life for a long time now, and I've always thought of you as someone who very unselfishly shows up and makes people who are funny a lot funnier. Like you set them up, you interact in a way that is not necessarily drawing attention to you. But when we first met, I went back and I was starting to think of all the different places that I'd seen you over the years, and just today, I was rewatching your clip from Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I had to show it to my wife, and we were cracking up at it, and all the Veep stuff, and of course the interview, and
my gosh, thanks, Adrian.
No, but to get a compliment about a book that I think is like my first attempt at really doing kind of a comedy thing, to get some approbation from you, it really means so much. So
well, that means a lot. Thank you. And I won't get into it, but I'm just so thrilled that we're currently working on something together.
I know. Let's mention that.
and it really is, and I said it at the very beginning of this, but it is a real dream come true to not only be working on something with you, but to know you, and to even just have met you once. I'm that big a fan, and again, I just think you're a genius, and I'm so glad we got to share this time together.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for doing it, and again, we're not going to say too much, but I got to say, collaborating with you has been a real highlight for me artistically. It's not something that I've done that much in the past, and has not always come easy for me, but I definitely feel like we're working really well, and that you've improved my work in a lot of ways, and I think people will be happy with the results.
Yeah, I can't wait. But I guess I'll see you soon.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's event. It was a real pleasure to host Adrian Tomine and Randall Park, and welcome all of you. Congratulations, Adrian, on your book. Please consider purchasing a copy of The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Cartoonist by visiting us at powells.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. We look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye, everybody.